Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Habib Husni Al-Azis. Saya merupakan mahasiswa pendidikan IPS kelas 4A dengan NIM 1803825 Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Kali ini saya akan menjelaskan mengenai suatu model pembelajaran, yaitu pembelajaran berbasis konsep, atau dalam istilah Inggrisnya itu adalah konsep based learning. Nah, untuk lebih jelasnya kita saksikan video berikut ini. Video pertama ini diambil dari channel YouTube milik Corwin ya, yang berjudul Teaching Contextual Understanding. Silahkan disaksikan.
There are two ways to think about learning. A traditional perspective sees students as empty vessels. Students wait for the teacher to point out the facts and ideas they should collect in their jars. Students hold all the facts in their heads until they dump them out to prove they have retained them. But there's another way to look at learning. In concept-based learning, students begin not as empty vessels, but instead with their own pre-existing ideas, similar to a stone waiting to be sculpted. As we learn, we chisel away at our ideas until they become more sophisticated, clear, precise, complex, and accurate. At the end, we have a profound, well-thought-out idea of our own construction. In the second way of learning, the students are doing the work and benefiting from it, not the teacher. But how do you help students discover and refine these ideas? The secret is simple, just two words: uncover and transfer. To help students uncover an idea, start with an abstract question. If you're studying the concept of ecosystems, for example, we might start with a question like, what is the relationship between human actions and ecosystems? Have students share their initial thoughts. One might say, people can hurt the environment. That's a good start, but it's not complete. Now, investigate a specific context that illustrates that conceptual relationship. For example, deforestation in the Amazon. From this, students understand that human actions can directly devastate an ecosystem and contribute to the loss of certain species. Transfer is the next step of the process. Introduce a different example that will add a more nuanced understanding than they had before. For example, next you might investigate the effects humans have on oceans. Students will learn that human waste can end up in oceans and harm sea life, also threatening species. This is more of an indirect impact, adding even more nuance and complexity to their understanding. To assess students' understanding of the conceptual relationship, let's transfer again to the Arctic Ocean and have students hypothesize about the impact of global temperatures. Throughout this process of uncovering conceptual relationships and transferring to new situations, students should start to recognize a pattern. Rather than seeing smaller individual ecosystems, students understand the Earth as an entire giant system where human actions may have a great impact. As you introduce more and more examples, students' understanding grows bigger, deeper, and more complex. This deep understanding of how the world works and the ability to transfer ideas to new contexts is an essential skill that allows students to become creators, problem solvers.
Kalian telah menyaksikan video yang pertama. Nah, apabila masih kurang memahami tentang pembelajaran berbasis konsep, berikut ini adalah ada video lagi, silahkan disaksikan. Ini berasal dari channel YouTube Minnesota History yang berjudul segmen 3 When it Incorporate Concept. Silahkan saksikan ya.
Hello, my name is Ryan Higbee, and I am going to try to answer this question: when can we incorporate concepts into our teaching practice? Into our teaching, and this example is specific to instruction. So you've already written your concept-based curriculum and now you're delivering it in front of a group of students. Here is five steps, you might call them the outline of a lesson plan, that I have kind of settled on whenever I try to go in and teach concepts. And so I'm going to work through these steps and provide an example that I taught to a group of 5th graders. First, you want to start with the concept, and then you want to identify this to students. You can either share the concept statement with students or maybe ask a question that gets students thinking about this big idea. I wanted students to understand that there is a connection between decisions and the impacts that those decisions have. And it was based on these 3 benchmarks that came from the social studies standards and then also from the English language arts standards. Once you've identified that big, timeless, abstract, universal, and transferable idea, then you need to pick a concrete example in which students can explore so that they can make meaning of that big idea. And I wanted them to think about Nelson Mandela and the decisions that he made and the impacts that they had on his life and also the people that lived in South Africa during apartheid. I knew that students didn't know a lot about Nelson Mandela and apartheid, and so I first started with a pre-assessment to figure out what students knew, and then I needed to build background knowledge, and I showed them first a timeline. I showed it bigger than that, and then also just a very, very short YouTube video about apartheid that was appropriate for 5th graders, explaining what apartheid was, when it was, what was happening around that period of time in South Africa. Then I read the picture book by Kadir Nelson called Nelson Mandela as a way for students to further explore Nelson Mandela's decisions and the impacts that they had. And I made them create a timeline, or this is really a flow chart, of the decisions and the impacts that they had. So first we talked about how Nelson Mandela's parents decided to send him to school, and then based on that decision, his mom decided to send him to the chief. Then he decided to become a lawyer because of that schooling that he had, and so on and so forth, until eventually Nelson Mandela decided to run for president, all the way at the end of the text. In order to meet that economics benchmark where students needed to be able to identify a historical choice and then think of alternative choices that could have been made, I had them take their flow map and then adapt it to be able to see how history would have been changed had Nelson Mandela made an alternative choice at any point during his life. Here's one of the examples from a student. In fact, this student completely redid the whole timeline and said the first decision was one that would have been changed, so that parents decided to not send Nelson Mandela to school, and then thought about all the different ways that Mandela's life and the life of South Africans would have changed based on that one decision being different. Here are a couple of other examples. You'll notice by the piece of tape, this student kept the 2 decisions that were originally on the flow map and then changed the rest of the map. Here's another example. And you'll notice that this student is realizing that if a decision would have been different, then apartheid would have continued. It would have had a major impact on the life of South Africans. Then in concept-based teaching, I want to be able to check for students' understanding of that concept. So not the specific knowledge I've been teaching them about Nelson Mandela, but rather, do they understand that choices have an impact? And so I gave them this prompt and talked about the importance of nightly reading, and then allowed the students to answer either in a flow map, which was the format that they were used to, or in paragraph form. So this child is telling me they didn't understand the concept because, no, they don't need to continue to read every night because they can just read stop signs and everyday things. This student, though, is starting to realize that her decision now will have an impact in the future. Reading now will impact her learning for a long time. This child also understands that decisions can have impacts. Even though I'm not asking them about Nelson Mandela and his decisions, they're able to transfer their understanding of the concept. Finally, I would reflect on students' thinking to be able to decide what your next steps are. And in this specific lesson, I was really impressed with the students' overall ability to transfer their understanding from the context in which I taught the concept to a different context altogether. And if you want to read more about my reflections on that lesson, check out that blog post. My next steps for this class would have been to pick another specific concrete example that illustrated the idea that choices have impacts, but I might have students pick the example that they want to dig into, that engages them and that's relevant in their lives. And then give them opportunities to explore that example so that they can continue to construct understanding of the idea that choices and decisions have